Well, good evening, Little Masters, and welcome to episode 119 of the Prancing Pony Podcast, where tonight, well, we'll turn on our fog lights and keep to the left.
If only ponies had fog lights, right? But folks, we'll head on over to the fog-free common room in just a few moments. But first, I'm Sean Marchese, the real-life Lord of the Mark, and I'm here with the man of the West, who refuses to nap with his back to a standing stone, Alan Sisto.
Well, it's not often that I refuse a nap, for that matter, Sean, but yeah.
Well, tonight's recording might actually keep you awake after we're done, because it's pretty chilling stuff.
Yep.
And we're going to start the frights right away in today's installment of Philology Fair.
Yay! Can't wait to hear it, Sean. What do you have for us?
About as happy as it's going to get here tonight, folks. This chapter is just plain terrifying to me, Alan, and because of that, it's one of my favorites in the entirety of Lord of the Rings. Actually, it might be my favorite chapter in all of Book One. The monster we're going to meet today is one of my favorites in the entire Legendarium, and there's actually some interesting word nerdery regarding its name. So today we're going to talk about the word barrow-wight.
Ooh, very good choice.
Now, thank you. Now, it is a strange word, and I bet a lot of people come to this book having never heard the word wight before. Personally, when I read Lord of the Rings for the first time, the word wight was already familiar to me from Dungeons & Dragons, as I'm sure you're familiar there.
Yes.
But wights are described in D&D, and this comes from the website dndbeyond.com, which is sort of an official digital tool set for the D&D 5th edition.
Yeah.
They're described as intelligent undead humanoids that resemble armed and armored corpses.
Okay.
Of course, that's not exactly what wights are in Tolkien, but it's similar enough that even the first time I read this book, I had a sense of what we were dealing with here. So I knew a wight was something undead, and so I was actually very surprised when I got to college and I read the work of Geoffrey Chaucer for the first time, because I learned that in Middle English, the word wight, or wicht, as it's pronounced in Middle English, it just meant a person, just a guy, basically. Ring of Words,
just this week, you know.
he's weeked. Ring of Words, which I'm sure I've said in every episode since, I don't know, season 1, is one of my favorite books. Yeah. They actually quote exactly the line I'm thinking of as an example of this earlier meaning. In the Canterbury Tales, there's a knight whom Chaucer says was so noble that he never said anything unkind, unto no manner wicht, to any kind of person.
There you go. Well, as it turns out, Tolkien himself actually uses the word wight that way at least once in The Lord of the Rings. In The Passing of the Grey Company, that's Book 5, Chapter 2, as Aragorn and the Grey Company are leaving to take the paths of the dead, some of the Rohirrim say, "They are elvish wights. Let them go where they belong, into the dark places, and never return." Well, the Rohirrim are clearly not saying that Aragorn and his friends are elvish animated corpses. They just mean something like elf-like folk, with a strong hint of contempt or disapproval for what they're doing.
Yeah, and that's very interesting because it seems that as time went on, the use of wight to mean just a person took on a more negative connotation. The neutral sense of just this guy was more or less obsolete by about the 16th century.
I love that. That's great.
That was pretty much gone by the 16th century, according to the Oxford English Dictionary. But also, as that sense was declining, a narrower sense started picking up around 1200, which was this sort of contemptuous sense. Basically, you start getting phrases like drunken wight or the unlucky wight and things like that. And that stays around till about the 19th century.
Huh. Wow.
And the authors of Ring of Words did actually bring out the quote that you just mentioned from Return of the King.
Oh, wow.
But there's another meaning here that starts up as early as the 10th century in Old English, where the word wight, or again, wicht, started to mean a supernatural creature like a ghost or a demon. The first usage of the word wight in this sense in Old English is actually the oldest surviving English translation of the Gospel of Mark. Chapter 6, verse 49, there's a word in Greek and Latin, which is phantasma, which means exactly what it sounds like, a phantasm or a ghost. And that was translated into Old English as evil wicht, evil wight.
Wow, okay.
Yeah. Now, as for barrow, Tolkien explains in the nomenclature of The Lord of the Rings that is a recent adoption by archaeologists of the English dialect word barrow, which was earlier spelled barrow with an E, and that comes from Old English berg, hill or mound.
Right. Well, and some of our longtime listeners might remember all the way back in episode 55, we did a Philology Fair segment on Tolkien's use of dwarves, with the V, as the plural for dwarf. In that segment, we pointed to Tolkien's note in Appendix F to The Lord of the Rings. He says, the plural should be dwarros, or dweros, if singular and plural had each gone its way down the years, as have man and men, or goose and geese. And the reason he said that is because the Old English word dwerg, plural dwergus, should have undergone similar changes to berg. Berg becomes barrow, dwerg becomes dwero.
Right. But of course, linguistic changes don't always do what you think they're going to, which is why dwerg ended up becoming dwarf, while berg ended up becoming barrow.
Right.
Now, the Oxford English Dictionary tells us that barrow generally went out of use in English before 1400, but it was preserved in special senses. And around 1576, we see one of these special senses as the word barrow starts to come back into use with a special sense of a mound of earth or stones erected in early times over a grave.
Now's a good time to remind people that Stone Age burial mounds, or barrows, are pretty common across Western Europe, including England. Now, just recently, back in episode 112, I cited an observation from Tom Shippey that I was pointed to by Hammond and Skull, where barely 15 miles from Tolkien's study, the Berkshire Downs rise from the Oxfordshire Plain, thickly studded with Stone Age mounds, among them the famous Wayland's Smithy, from which a track leads to 9 Barrows Down. But I should point out that listener Steve H. corrected us on this, saying, "You are unfortunately 2 barrows out. 9 Barrows Down is 78 miles away on the south coast. 7 Barrows is roughly 5 miles from Wayland's Smithy." Well, thank you, Steve, for the correction. And just for our own sake, I'd like to reiterate that we presented the quote as Shippey wrote it.
Right. Well, now I hate to get too far afield here, but since you used this word too, down, as in Barrow-downs, simply means a hill or a mountain, and it's actually related to the word dune.
Oh, of course.
And no, I'm not going to make a dune reference there.
No Frank Herbert connection here? No?
No Frank Herbert reference today. That word frequently appears in the plural in England as downs,
right,
with the meaning of an elevated stretch of open, uncultivated land with gently rolling hills, which is what we see here.
Right. So the Barrow-downs simply means the Tomb Hills.
Right. And that does seem like a great place to stop this segment, but not yet. You'd like to think so, wouldn't you?
That's right. We never stop at the great place to stop. We stop at the adequate place to stop.
That's right. That's right. We keep on going.
Or the far too late place to stop.
We should have stopped a long time ago place. But I'd also like to point out that although Tolkien says in the nomenclature that barrow-wight was his own invention, I'm afraid the professor might have forgotten reading it somewhere else.
Well, that is possible.
In 1816, yeah, it happens. You
know.
In 1869, William Morris, who is an early fantasy author who was an influence on Tolkien. We've
not the advertising agency?
No, not at all. Quite different.
I'm sure, yes.
He teamed up with an Eirikr Magnusson to translate an Icelandic saga called Grettis Saga, the story of Grettir the Strong. Now, Hammond and Skull, in their Reader's Guide, now that's the
3-volume.
The 3-volume set,
right.
not the Lord of the Rings Reader's Companion. Hammond and Skull say that Tolkien did own a copy of the Morris and Magnusson translation of this saga, and the word barrow-wight does appear in that translation, which again is from 1869.
Wow.
Now, the authors of Ring of Words also point out that another scholar, Andrew Lang, used the word barrow-wights in an essay that he wrote on the Norse sagas that he published in 1891. And it seems he was referring to the Morris and Magnusson translation.
Well, and if you're a longtime listener trying to figure out just where you know that name of Andrew Lang, he was the editor of those colored fairy books that were very popular in Tolkien's youth. And as we've said a couple of times before on the show, Tolkien's essay on fairy stories was originally presented in 1939 as a lecture in honor of Andrew Lang.
That's right. So Tolkien was definitely familiar with both Morris and Lang, and it is quite possible that Tolkien had read Lang's essay on those Norse sagas as well as that Morris translation. But, as we said, anybody who's ever written anything knows that, sometimes you write things that you thought were original just because you forgot where you read it.
I think it's happened on the show.
I'm sure. Yes, it absolutely has. But it's like Tolkien himself said to Humphrey Carpenter, a story grows like a seed in the dark out of the leaf mold of the mind, out of all that has been seen or thought or read, that has long ago been forgotten, descending into the deeps. But I suppose that's a topic for another day that could very easily take us too far afield.
Quite.
So we probably should go ahead and get started.
Not a bad idea. But before we do move on to our chapter discussion tonight, we want to take a minute to once again thank listener Jordan Ellis Rennells for sponsoring this week's episode.
Jordan is a musician, composer, and music teacher, and Tolkien reader. Just as we've spent a lot of time exploring and analyzing the themes of Tolkien's works, Jordan has invested time in understanding the way Howard Shore composed the scores for the Lord of the Rings films.
And he's looking to take on new music students from anywhere in the world for piano, drums, guitar, or any other fretted instrument for Skype-based lessons. And he's also looking for folks who are interested in studying music composition.
Jordan has spent years devising his own methods and explanations in music theory and relates the technical concepts back to real-life human emotions.
So if you play an instrument, or if you're interested in studying music composition with an experienced composer and music teacher, or if you need some sound design and scoring done for a project of your own, be sure to visit www.learntolisten.net.
And be sure to let him know you heard about him here on the Prancing Pony Podcast when you reach out.
Yeah.
That's www.learntolisten.net for Skype-based music lessons or to study music composition with Jordan Ellis Rennells. And we'll be sure to put a link to his site in our show notes and social media posts.
Absolutely. And thanks again, Jordan. Now, let's head into the Barrow-downs and see what waits for us there. Oh, no.
Oh.
No, that was bad. I'm sorry.
Sorry. Oh, you've been hanging around me too long. That was a Sean pun.
I have. And speaking of sorry, not sorry, we're about to read about a dream, not dream. We're not really sure which it is, are we? I'm going to have you read the first couple paragraphs of the chapter because, as we know, the beginning of the chapter is a very good place to start.
I didn't know where you were going with that.
Now you do.
All right. That night they heard no noises, but either in his dreams or out of them, he could not tell which, Frodo heard a sweet singing running in his mind, a song that seemed to come like a pale light behind a gray rain curtain, and growing stronger to turn the veil all to glass and silver, until at last it was rolled back, and a far green country opened before him under a swift sunrise. The vision melted into waking, and there was Tom whistling like a tree full of birds, and the sun was already slanting down the hill and through the open window. Outside, everything was green and pale gold.
There's a part of me that just wants to tell Tom to shut up already. Would you stop with the morning whistling?
I'm trying to sleep here.
I was having a great dream, and you woke me up. I mean, never mind that it's kind of a dream about, well, not really death, but it's something fairly close to it.
Not quite death, yeah.
No. For those of you who find that very familiar, obviously this is presaging the very end of the story. And I'm going to read a little bit from the Grey Havens here. And the ship went out into the high sea. This is a spoiler, isn't it? This is like something that's going to happen in about 5 years. So I guess
I think everybody knows how the story ends, so I think it's okay.
But yeah, it's pretty much the end of the story. And the ship went out into the high sea and passed on into the west, until at last, on a night of rain, Frodo smelled a sweet fragrance on the air and heard the sound of singing that came over the water. And then it seemed to him that, as in his dream in the house of Bombadil, the gray rain curtain turned all to silver glass and was rolled back, and he beheld white shores, and beyond them a far green country under a swift sunrise. Man.
Okay, I want to say a word about that because no doubt that's clearly what's happening here. This is definitely a link, back to this moment. And I mean, it says it.
It says as in his dream, right?
In the House of Bombadil. And so it's very interesting that it is clearly, sort of foreshadowing Frodo's eventual fate, his ennoblement as he passes into the West, as one of our listeners said recently.
Right.
Which is why it's really interesting to me that in the last chapter, we saw this, not exactly this phrase, but we saw a rain curtain that was gray.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was in a very literal sense. I'm looking for it now. So, okay, here it is. So a straight gray rain came softly and steadily down.
Yeah.
Behind its deep curtain, the forest was completely veiled.
Veiled.
Now that's a very literal gray rain curtain.
Yeah.
And then we've got this metaphoric, supernatural, spiritual, whatever, gray rain curtain later on. It's very interesting that this dream links those two together.
It really is. Yeah. And there's singing in both. Frodo hears the sweet singing, and then here we hear the sound of singing that came over the water. There's some, combine that with Tom singing, and how we talked about how the world was sung into existence, and then Goldberry's tie with water and rain. There's a lot of deep stuff here, no doubt about it.
There is, and it's fascinating that Tom and Goldberry's house, their realm, is so supernatural, but also so completely natural, so earthly.
So overly natural, ultra natural, if you will.
Yeah, exactly. Profoundly, completely natural, while also being spiritual in a strange way. It's it's going to be interesting in a couple of episodes when we really start talking about what the heck is Tom.
Yes, it will. I mean, I know we've kind of touched on that, and we'll keep touching on it again, I'm sure, in bits and pieces. But yeah, our big discussion for that will be in a couple more episodes at the end of this chapter. But I do still think that maybe we'd get a little bit more about this vision if Tom just didn't feel like whistling every morning.
Well, sure. Yeah, you go around waking up your guests and they miss, the ending of these dreams of great augury and import.
There you go. The green and pale gold outside. I don't know. I just love those colors, that description.
It's lovely. Yeah.
Even though we're talking about autumn, it's clearly, the pale gold. Things are starting to turn, but it's just a lovely vision. The light already coming down the hill, so it's certainly past early morning. It may be past bedtime or past wake up time, so maybe it's okay that Tom's whistling around like a tree full of birds. It's not even subtle. He's not like whistling
not even a bird
tune.
Or two. It's a tree full of birds.
Yeah. Which I don't know how he manages to do that. I mean, can you?
It's a neat trick.
It would be. That would be. That's a real.
He's an expert
trick.
Singer, that Tom.
Yes, he is. Quite the musician. And once again, the hobbits end up eating breakfast by themselves. I don't know if that's because Tom and Goldberry don't eat, or maybe they just eat one meal a day, supper time. I don't know. But they're eating by themselves.
They must eat, right? I mean, they've got lots of food around the house.
They must. I mean, certainly they don't have a lot of meat. No,
which to you is the same as not eating.
Well, pretty much. I mean, shouldn't you have bacon and sausage at your breakfasts? Really? I mean, that's.
We talked about this. Where are they going to get meat? Tom's not going to hunt.
No.
And he's not going to keep animals as livestock.
I guess Goldberry could go drown a wild animal with her rainstorms.
Or go fishing or something.
There you go.
No, I guess not.
Fish, maybe, yeah. Some
sushi at Tom and Goldberry's house, I think, would be delicious.
Little California roll.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry.
We digress.
I'm just having too much fun with this. Yeah.
Yeah. Heavy of heart despite the beautiful day. There's something there. It's.
Yeah.
They don't.
They know they're
leave.
leaving. They don't want to leave. Yeah. This place has been. They knew it was temporary when they first came, but we saw the previous morning. Frodo was happy that it was raining and he couldn't leave. You know, now it's.
And it's more than just a temporary place of safety. I think there's some the refreshment of their stay here.
Yeah, I think so.
I think we saw something about that, even at the very end of a couple of chapters ago when they stepped over or even before they stepped over the threshold, when half their fears were already gone, or something along those lines. Maybe it was even all of their fear, half of their fatigue and all of their fear. I believe it was. There's something very magical about this place that is restorative.
Yes.
And I think they realize that when they leave here, it's going to be back to the grind. It's going to be a hard road.
Yeah.
And they're going to miss this. So.
And I think it's significant that this is a more down-to-earth kind of restorative or magical place.
Yeah.
We talked about how the enchantment of, I think this was definitely a few episodes ago. But I think the first part of the previous chapter, we talked about how Goldberry was, she's mysterious. She's sort of magical, but she's not elvish. She was kind of closer to home for the hobbits. And you got to feel like this place feels like home to the hobbits and they don't want to leave.
Very much so. Absolutely. More so certainly than any of the elvish places that they'll be.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see like when they leave places like Rivendell or Lothlorien, what kind of language comes in there as they're leaving. Surely they're not happy to leave, but do they feel this kind of connection with those places? That's
a very good point. We'll have to keep an eye out for that. So they do head off and they leave with the ponies, and then I'm going to pick up right after that. Goldberry, he cried, he being Frodo. I'm picking up kind of in the middle of something that's happening, but there you have it. My fair lady, clad all in silver green. We have never said farewell to her, nor seen her since the evening. He was so distressed that he turned back. But at that moment, a clear call came rippling down. There on the hill brow, she stood beckoning to them. Her hair was flying loose, and as it caught the sun, it shone and shimmered. A light, like the glint of water on dewy grass, flashed from under her feet as she danced. They hastened up the last slope and stood breathless beside her. They bowed, but with a wave of her arm she bade them look round, and they looked out from the hilltop over lands under the morning. It was now as clear and far seen as it had been veiled and misty when they stood upon the knoll in the forest, which could now be seen rising pale and green out of the dark trees in the west. In that direction, the land rose in wooded ridges, green, yellow, russet under the sun, beyond which lay hidden the valley of the Brandywine. To the south, over the line of the Withywindle, there was a distant glint like pale glass where the Brandywine River made a great loop in the lowlands and flowed away out of the knowledge of the hobbits. Northward, beyond the dwindling downs, the land ran away in flats and swellings of gray and green and pale earth colors, until it faded into a featureless and shadowy distance. Eastward, the Barrow-downs rose, ridge behind ridge into the morning, and vanished out of eyesight into a guess. It was no more than a guess of blue and a remote white glimmer blending with the hem of the sky, but it spoke to them out of memory and old tales of the high and distant mountains.
Mm-hmm.
They took a deep draught of the air and felt that a skip and a few stout strides would bear them wherever they wished. It seemed faint-hearted to go jogging aside over the crumpled skirts of the downs towards the road, when they should be leaping, as lusty as Tom, over the stepping stones of the hills straight towards the mountains. There you go.
Very, very cool stuff.
Though I don't know that I want to picture Tom as being lusty. That's just me, though.
you
Sorry.
and your gutter mind. He's got a passion for life, my friend.
He does. I know. And I know that's what that means, but it was just,
Of course.
It was an opportunity.
Of course.
There's a little bit to unpack here, isn't there?
Yeah.
He said
Yeah,
sarcastically. I mean, there's certainly plenty.
Yep.
You caught something about the glint of water on dewy grass, huh?
Yeah, well, I'm kind of tuned into all this water imagery surrounding Goldberry now, and there's just a ton of it here. The glint of water on dewy grass that flashed from under her feet. Even before that, really, you've got, her voice comes rippling down.
Yeah.
Her hair shimmers in the sun.
Yeah.
Just tons of this water imagery surrounding her again.
Yeah.
I mean, and we've talked about what we think that means,
Mm-hmm.
but it is, Tolkien really carries that thread throughout. He really makes us think of water every time we think of Goldberry.
He really does.
And I'm reminded of how Tolkien talks about how in water is
where the music is still heard. Mm-hmm.
Yep, exactly.
That's right. I love this bit at the end where they breathe deep. They take a deep draft of the air, and now they just feel completely rejuvenated. Overly confident. Forget going north towards the road. Let's just go straight over the downs and head towards our goal. But
they feel emboldened by this time with Tom. Tom is inspiring them. They want to leap as lusty as he.
Absolutely. And this is just a few moments after they had felt, heavy-hearted, that they weren't ready to leave. And here they are, not only ready to leave, but ready to leave in a hurry and go do their job. Pretty amazing.
Go do the thing.
Amazing turnaround, really.
Yeah. I like this little bit about the land itself speaking to them.
Yes.
Sort of telling them a story out of memory and old tales. I just think it's a neat turn of phrase.
That whole paragraph with the landscape description was just beautiful. I don't have a lot to really say about that. I mean, I can certainly picture it in my mind. I'm sure you all can as well. Imagining a hilly country during autumn where you've got these ridges of green and yellow and reddish brown. And
real autumn colors again. Yeah.
Just beautiful. And being able
and
to
yet
see.
The Barrow-downs are right there in the distance.
Yeah, not far away. And he describes each of the different directions. You can look back to the west, and you can actually even see that knoll where they'd been earlier, before they had the nap by the tree. And then you look to the south, and you get a little bit more of a geography lesson about where the Brandywine River makes this great loop, and then goes out of the knowledge of the hobbits, and thus sort of out of the knowledge of the book. We're not told anything more about it. It's almost as though we're being given only what the hobbits know. Really, just
that's true. But it's a reminder that the river doesn't end there, and that the hobbits' knowledge is limited. Yeah,
that's right. That's right. It is parochial in a way. But yeah, they do have this just wonderful description here that Tolkien puts together of the landscape and of the view that they have in each of the directions. But we're not going to read Goldberry's reminder, but she has a great bit of advice here, telling them basically to hurry up and hold to your purpose, she says. But you've got a little bit more here on the make haste while the sun shines, huh?
Yeah, and it's a question more than an answer, honestly. And I'd love to hear from listeners on this. She says, make haste while the sun shines. Now, I've always heard this proverb, make hay while the sun shines. Do you know that one?
Right. Yeah, I do. That's how I heard it as well.
Yeah, and it basically just means to, take advantage of an opportunity while you've got it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Goldberry's advice is literal. She's not speaking proverbially here.
No,
she's saying
not.
literally, make haste, hurry before the sun goes down.
Uh-huh.
But I wonder how common this version of make haste while the sun shines is.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm not as familiar with it, and I even Googled it, and I can only find something like 7,000 hits for it on Google compared to like 369,000 hits on Google for make hay while the sun shines.
Yeah,
so clearly make hay is the more common version.
Mm-hmm.
I can't find anything conclusive on why Tolkien used the phrase make haste the way he did. I wonder if maybe he was trying to back form, like, we talk about these asterisk versions of things that he does. Yeah. And I wondered if maybe he's trying to do that. I don't really know why. So that's why I'm curious if any of our listeners are more familiar with this make haste. Maybe there's a British variant that's more common. Yeah. As opposed
We're
to
finding that that's the case more often than not.
A lot of times things that we think are strange are more common.
What do you think that's strange?
Right.
You're strange, you weird American. What's wrong with you?
Right, exactly. So
Throwing
I'd love
away
to
all
hear
that
from
good
listeners.
tea and everything.
Hey, I drink tea. I love my tea.
Yeah, but we threw away a bunch of it a while back.
Yeah, I wasn't here at the time.
No, neither was I.
My ancestors weren't here. I don't take any responsibility for throwing that tea. Waste of good tea. No, I'm just curious to hear from listeners. Are people more familiar with this make haste variant? And if so, where is that more common? Yeah.
That's a good thing.
Something I'm fascinated by.
Maybe we can get a little bit of insight on that.
Yeah.
We get another reiteration of Frodo being an elf friend. Again, it's just in that section we're not going to read, but the special goodbye that Goldberry gives him as an elf friend and telling him that it was a merry meeting, certainly worth at least noting. And then after Goldberry waves goodbye and as they mount their ponies and head down the hill and she waves goodbye, you've got the next little passage here.
Okay. Turning back, when they reached the bottom of the green hollow, they saw Goldberry, now small and slender like a sunlit flower against the sky. She was standing still watching them, and her hands were stretched out towards them. As they looked, she gave a clear call, and lifting up her hand, she turned and vanished behind the hill. Their way wound along the floor of the hollow and round the green feet of a steep hill into another deeper and broader valley, and then over the shoulders of further hills, and down their long limbs, and up their smooth sides again, up onto new hilltops and down into new valleys. There was no tree nor any visible water. It was a country of grass and short springy turf, silent, except for the whisper of the air over the edges of the land, and high lonely cries of strange birds. As they journeyed, the sun mounted and grew hot. Each time they climbed a ridge, the breeze seemed to have grown less. When they caught a glimpse of the country westward, the distant forest seemed to be smoking, as if the fallen rain was steaming up again from leaf and root and mold. A shadow now lay round the edge of sight, a dark haze above which the upper sky was like a blue cap, hot and heavy.
Starting to get a little foreboding, a little unpleasant with the heat and the dying breeze.
Yeah. A heat and a kind of an alien stillness, these strange birds.
That was disturbing. I don't know that I'd really caught that before in terms of the strangeness. I don't know what to make of that per se, but I do know that it's certainly intended to give us a very uncomfortable feeling, and it succeeds.
Yeah. Well, and this is the hobbits, finally stepping beyond the boundaries of where any of them have been. I'm thinking of Sam. It'll be the farthest away from home I've ever been. And I think that's why I said that. But Merry was familiar with the Old Forest. As long as they were in the Old Forest, it was scary and it was treacherous, but it was still an area they knew. Now they are truly past the boundaries of
they're well beyond anybody's historical knowledge, even from ancestors who'd maybe done some crazy journeying.
Right, exactly. I noticed at the beginning of the passage that I just read, for once, Goldberry's not compared to water. It says she's small and slender like a sunlit flower. So maybe there's a little bit of that. Just kind of a few episodes ago, we talked about Tolkien's idea that she represents the seasons. Yeah, and there's something just more kind of general nature imagery around her. But
that's a good point.
One of the few.
You're right.
Most of the time she is compared
it's
to
all
water.
water. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then when we're talking about, the steaming of the forest, we get that word mold again, which we talked about the a little while ago. I mentioned Tolkien's leaf mold quote.
Right.
Yeah. Right. And, that's just mold in the sense of an upper layer of soil that's rich in organic matter that plants can grow on. He's not talking about mold.
The green stuff.
Fungus.
That, grows on your, loaf of bread that's been sitting in the kitchen for 2 months. Right.
Right. This is a different mold.
Yes, it is. Mold with a U. It's even spelled differently.
I think the other kind of mold might be spelled with a U in England too.
Oh, yeah, probably. Well, so even though we're not going to read the next paragraph, I just want to kind of at least touch on it and summarize it. We've got this arrival at midday onto a hill that's flat at the top, a little bit of a rim, sort of a kind of a depression at the top, very still again, no air stirring, but they think that they've made some success, right? They look and they see what appears to be a long line that Merry thinks is a road. Indicates the road, I should say, that he thinks it's a line of trees. And of course, Frodo's absolutely thrilled. He thinks, man, we're going to be there. We'll be out of the downs by sunset. And then I'm going to pick up from that point. But even as he spoke, he turned his glance eastward, and he saw that on that side the hills were higher and looked down upon them. And all those hills were crowned with green mounds, and on some were standing stones, pointing upwards like jagged teeth out of green gums. That view was somehow disquieting, so they turned from the sight and went down into the hollow circle. In the midst of it there stood a single stone, standing tall under the sun above, and at this hour casting no shadow. It was shapeless and yet significant, like a landmark or a guarding finger, or more like a warning. But they were now hungry, and the sun was still at the fearless noon, so they set their backs against the east side of the stone. It was cool, as if the sun had had no power to warm it, but at that time this seemed pleasant. There they took food and drink, and made as good a noon meal under the open sky as anyone could wish, for the food came from down under hill. Tom had provided them with plenty for the comfort of the day. Their ponies, unburdened, strayed upon the grass. Which is the nice, pleasant scene you expect before disaster strikes, don't you?
Absolutely, yeah. It's always awesome before something horrible happens.
And the music's about to change into minor key now. Yeah.
I can't understand why the sight of standing stones on the hills looking like jagged teeth and green gums, why is that disquieting?
You'd think, oh, that's kind of neat. No.
Yeah.
You
look like great big zombie mouth that they're staring into.
And then, there's this odd stone that for some reason, even though it's been, light for 5 or 6 hours, doesn't have any warmth to it at all.
Isn't that creepy?
That's really creepy.
Yeah.
But hey, it's like air conditioning, so sit up against this side.
It's like the larder stone. Remember we talked about Bilbo's larder, the big cold stone that you put meat on? Yeah. That's
right. I absolutely remember that. That was such a fun little thing to find out about.
That was, yeah.
Yeah.
That was super cool. But yeah, here that's just really creepy. Like you said, this thing has been standing out in the sun. It should at least be somewhat warm.
And it's the east side of the stone, so it's been exposed to the sun for several hours.
Since morning, yeah.
The west side maybe, but
right.
This is a little
That's
creepy.
A good point, yeah.
Yeah. But, they try to find, some pleasure here, some joy with their meal. Of course, they're hobbits, so that's certainly a natural place to start. Right, exactly. Mm-hmm. Their ponies are free to kind of wander around and munch a little bit for themselves. But something's about to happen, and I'm going to let you tell us what that is.
Riding over the hills and eating their fill, the warm sun and the scent of turf, lying a little too long, stretching out their legs and looking at the sky above their noses. These things are perhaps enough to explain what happened. However that may be, they woke suddenly and uncomfortably from a sleep they had never meant to take. The standing stone was cold, and it cast a long pale shadow that stretched eastward over them. The sun, a pale and watery yellow, was gleaming through the mist just above the west wall of the hollow in which they lay. North, south, and east, beyond the wall, the fog was thick, cold, and white. The air was silent, heavy, and chill. Their ponies were standing crowded together with their heads down. The hobbits sprang to their feet in alarm and ran to the western rim. They found that they were upon an island in the fog. Even as they looked out in dismay towards the setting sun, it sank before their eyes into a white sea, and a cold gray shadow sprang up in the east behind. The fog rolled up to the walls and rose above them, and as it mounted, it bent over their heads until it became a roof. They were shut in a hall of mist, whose central pillar was the standing stone.
And now it's officially creepy. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty spooky now.
This is not good news. Cue spooky music.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. Don't ever fall asleep unexpectedly in Tolkien's books, okay? If you're a hobbit or other hero in a book that takes place in Middle-earth, stay awake, okay? Little PSA
even if you're a Vala,
podcast.
Even if you're a Vala, Mr.
Right.
Tulkas, you might have been able to...
don't get weary and content and fall asleep.
And Tulkas slept. I mean, isn't that when Morgoth snuck back in, right?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, or Melkor at that time, but yeah.
Right. But, I'm reminded of nothing so much as Chapter 4 of The Hobbit here.
Yes, you're right.
When the heroes, they find this cave and they get a little too comfortable and fall asleep. And since I just read that big chunk of text, I actually asked Alan to read this little passage from Chapter 4 of The Hobbit, because I just want to see if I'm right that there's a little similarity here.
Well, of course, I think you are right, which is something you won't hear from me very often, but, I'll let that go today. But I'm going to go ahead and read. So this was in the Cave of the Misty Mountains. Like you said, Bilbo and his friends had taken shelter from that storm. They made their blankets comfortable, got out their pipes and blew smoke rings, which Gandalf turned into different colors, and set dancing up by the roof to amuse them. They talked and forgot about the storm, and discussed what each would do with his share of the treasure when they got it, which at the moment did not seem so impossible. And so they dropped off to sleep one by one. And that was the last time that they used the ponies, packages, baggages, tools, and paraphernalia that they had brought with them. Because, of course, the goblins popped out while they were sleeping and captured them, taking them down to Goblin Town. So.
Right. So there's a little similarity there. I mean, okay, I guess the dwarves and Bilbo, they got really, really way too comfortable. But still, in both cases, the heroes should have known better. They should have been on their guard, and they get too comfortable. And it seems like early on in these adventures, same thing with Tulkas, really. Early on in the story, it's easy for the heroes not to realize how much danger they're in. Yeah. And
pay a
time
price.
and time again, they get busted for it.
You're absolutely right. Absolutely right. Yeah. Just set your alarm, tell your iPhone to wake you up in 30 minutes, something.
Right. Something.
Anyway, very, very unfortunate and very creepy description of all of this, huh?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, this idea of just the fog rising up and turning into this hall. There really is a trap here.
Yeah. And it seems like a supernatural one at that, the central pillar being the standing stone. Yeah.
Even the sun being described as pale and watery yellow.
Yeah.
Deep in the west, just
days
ending and the sun
horizon.
Is not. Yeah. And it's not a warm sun anymore. It's just a sort of weak, cold, there's something unwholesome about that pale and watery yellow description.
Yeah, there really is. And it's what you can imagine, on a really foggy day where you can see where the sun is, but you can look at it. It's so weak. You can look directly at it because it's so obscured by clouds and fog that it's barely brighter than the surrounding sky.
Right.
Very pale, no warmth, no sense of warmth coming from it.
Yeah. And what a change that is from when they fell asleep.
Oh, significantly.
At noon when it was beating down on them and it was hot.
Right. This is the exact opposite. Cold, damp, all this mist. But the trap. And even though we're not going to read this next paragraph, I love that they didn't lose heart, or at least they didn't quite lose heart. They actually took hope from their previous observations, thinking that they knew where the road was. Now, I have to say, maybe the smarter thing would have been to just stay exactly where you were, try to light a fire and get through the night. Maybe, but it's pretty creepy, so I can't blame them.
I mean, when you're lost, that's usually good advice, isn't it? You're lost, just stay where you are, and
certainly
wait
until it becomes light
way.
Again. Yeah.
Yeah. But they've heard these stories about these hills, and I guess they just want to get the heck out of there as quickly as they can.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't blame them for that. This is when it would be nice if ponies had fog lights.
Right.
But
Totally.
yeah, so I'm going to go ahead. We see them actually getting out of that bowl and down the hill.
I'm sorry. I'm just thinking of like strapping a couple of those Feanorian lamps from the first age.
Oh, yeah. Just throw them on there. Absolutely.
Why didn't those things catch on? Anyway.
I don't know why. Maybe the fuel source wasn't portable enough. I don't know.
Could be.
Yeah. Maybe they took electricity and they needed to be charged and there just weren't enough superchargers around.
Or maybe the Feanor brand just wasn't quite what it used to be.
I think the Feanor brand had taken a hit. You're right. You're right.
Really they had some PR issues early in the first stage.
They did, didn't they? They never really quite recovered.
No, they didn't.
They didn't. But anyway.
Yeah.
So they're heading down the hill, and it just gets colder, more miserable, damp. I love this line. Their hair hung lank and dripping on their foreheads. Boy, is that a description? Yeah. I've been in fog like that, where you just walk 5 or 6 steps and it feels like you've taken a shower. It's so wet. There's so much moisture in the air, and it just condenses on you.
Yep.
So they're trying to find their way to the north. And then I'm going to go ahead and pick up in the next little section here, sort of hobbits in the mist. Not exactly gorillas in the mist.
I love that movie. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this is a different movie. Very different. Their going was very slow. To prevent their getting separated and wandering in different directions, they went in file, with Frodo leading. Sam was behind him, and after him came Pippin and then Merry. The valley seemed to stretch on endlessly. Suddenly, Frodo saw a hopeful sign. On either side ahead, a darkness began to loom through the mist, and he guessed that they were at last approaching the gap in the hills, the north gate of the Barrow-downs. If they could pass that, they would be free. "Come on, follow me," he called back over his shoulder, and he hurried forward. But his hope soon changed to bewilderment and alarm. The dark patches grew darker, but they shrank, and suddenly he saw, towering ominous before him and leaning slightly towards one another like the pillars of a headless door, 2 huge standing stones. He could not remember having seen any sign of these in the valley when he looked out from the hill in the morning. He had passed between them almost before he was aware, and even as he did so, darkness seemed to fall round him. His pony reared and snorted, and he fell off. When he looked back, he found that he was alone. The others had not followed him.
This is not going well.
This is really, really not going well. It's one of those moments, though, where you're kind of thinking, come on, Frodo, just think this through. Really? You haven't been away from that hilltop long enough for you to have reached the gate that you saw miles away.
Yeah.
Think this through.
What do you think it is? Do you think that he's, we saw he was just so emboldened by his time with Tom.
Right.
Did he get too overconfident? Did he start to get a little sloppy? Is he just terrified, which I could understand?
Oh, yeah. I'm sure their fear is what drove them to leave the bowl. Yeah. I mean, they, like it says, they now had so great a dislike for that hollow place about the stone that no thought of remaining there was in their minds. So, fear was driving them away, but they had to be going very slowly.
Yeah.
And towards the north, towards the end of that valley. But yeah, just miscalculation. Certainly, a little optical illusion of the darkness.
I think there's a lot there too, because it's interesting. We saw them get lost in the old forest. They were bewildered by the trees that kept moving around. They couldn't find paths through the trees. Here, they're bewildered by just mist.
Yeah.
It's incredible. It's so foggy that they just can't see around. And
it's a mist of confusion. Not to be confused with the Genesis song "Land of Confusion," just to be on the clear side.
No, not a. I'm thinking of a fog of war for some reason.
Fog of war, yeah, that too.
Yeah.
He makes the mistake, instead of saying, "Come on, follow me," and then hurrying forward, he could have said, Let's no longer go single file. Let's go next to each other, and let's slowly walk towards this to make sure it is what we think it is."
Yeah.
Maybe a little more caution, but I understand. When you think that you're about to escape this desolate place that you don't want to be anymore, you want to get out.
Yeah, this optical illusion. He thinks he's close to the edge of it and is just going to try and get out. So,
and by the time he figures it out, it's too late to stop.
It's too late.
He ends up passing them, and then things change radically at that point.
Right. Can I just take a moment to appreciate this this phrasing of a headless door?
Yes.
I mean, what a use of words. It's,
Boy, you're not
obviously
kidding.
it's true in a very literal sense, but you just can't hear this phrase without thinking of, a dead body.
Mm-hmm.
At least I can't.
Headless is not a word that you use very often, no.
That you use normally of architecture.
No, no, that's
or
true.
standing stones, yeah. Creepy.
So I'm gonna have you pick up right after that. The atmosphere begs to be continued because now you're picking up right where I left off, and let's go there.
Okay. Yeah, so after Frodo realizes that he's not being followed, he calls out and nobody responds. And then I'll pick up there. Fear took him, and he ran back past the stones, shouting wildly, "Sam! Sam! Merry! Pippin!" The pony bolted into the mist and vanished. From some way off, or so it seemed, he thought he heard a cry. "Hoy! Frodo! Hoy!" It was away eastward, on his left as he stood under the great stones, staring and straining into the gloom. He plunged off in the direction of the call, and found himself going steeply uphill. As he struggled on, he called again, and kept on calling more and more frantically. But he heard no answer for some time, and then it seemed faint and far ahead and high above him. "Frodo! Hoy!" came the thin voices out of the mist, and then a cry that sounded like, "Help! Help!" often repeated, ending with a last, "Help!" that trailed off into a long wail suddenly cut short.
Sorry. That just gave me the serious heebie-jeebies right there. A long wail suddenly cut short.
I know.
Yikes.
I know.
Anyway, sorry. I really didn't mean to interrupt, but
no, that's all right. It gives me chills just reading it.
Yeah. This is where I'd have to pause the movie.
Yeah.
And just say, okay, It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay.
Yeah. Tell the kids to cover their eyes if they were watching with you because you had no idea you were watching something so scary.
Yeah.
All right. He stumbled forward with all the speed he could towards the cries. But the light was now gone, and clinging night had closed about him, so that it was impossible to be sure of any direction. He seemed all the time to be climbing up and up. Only the change in the level of the ground at his feet told him when he at last came to the top of a ridge or hill. He was weary, sweating, and yet chilled. It was wholly dark.
Okay, this has now gone from mildly scary to a little bit more creepy to flat-out terrifying, I believe.
Absolutely terrifying at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where you start to realize, wow, Tolkien can write these scary passages so
absolutely.
Well.
Such a sense of panic.
Yeah.
Such a sense of
dread.
Completely being lost. Not even knowing where to go, what to do. Nothing he does is going to get him out of this.
Right.
Oh. And to hear his friends, to hear them calling help, and then at the end hearing one of them as it trails off into a long wail cut short.
Yeah.
Ooh, that's not a good thing to hear.
No, not at all. And they sound so far away.
They do, yeah. And how much of that is a trick of the mist, like a natural effect, and how much of that is magical in the sense that he has been somehow taken down.
To
right. Yeah. I mean, especially that key word about that it seemed faint and far ahead and high above him.
Yep.
Above? He's at the top. He was at the top of a hill.
Right.
How is that possible?
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And he feels like he's climbing up and up. Yeah. There's definitely some sort of magic going on here.
Oh, absolutely. And we'll see more of that in a bit. For now, though, I wanted to point out something early in that reading. He said that the pony bolted into the mist and vanished. Later in the chapter, Tom's going to chastise the hobbits for not recognizing the danger as well as their ponies do. And that reminded us of the way that the horses of the Grey Company reacted to the dark door into the paths of the dead.
Mm-hmm.
Now, those horses actually allowed themselves to be led into the dark place full of ghosts because of whom they were with. Aragorn led the way, and such was the strength of his will in that hour that all the Dunedain and their horses followed him. And indeed, the love that the horses of the Rangers bore for their riders was so great that they were willing to face even the terror of the door if their masters' hearts were steady as they walked beside them.
That's right. But Legolas's horse, Arad, who was one of the horses of Rohan, he didn't quite have that kind of bond with his master yet, did he?
Not yet, right.
And he did refuse to enter, at least at first. It said the horse was sweating and trembling in a fear that was grievous to see. Then Legolas laid his hands on his eyes and sang some words that went soft in the gloom, until he suffered himself to be led, and Legolas passed in.
All while Gimli stood outside afraid.
yeah, of course. Yeah. Even now I can hear John Rhys Davies saying here's a thing unheard of. An elf will go underground and a dwarf dare not.
Indeed.
So yeah, it's interesting to see how these animals have a little bit
real
more sense of, of the danger and the fear. Yeah.
A little more awareness, a little more, and maybe it's just that slightly more simple focus. They're not distracted by things like, oh, I think this might be the way to our exit.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. They just act on instinct. They feel something doesn't feel right, and they get scared by it.
Absolutely.
Of course, if they're anything like cats, they get scared by neckties. So
well, right, exactly. All you need now is just to use a little laser pointer, and then you can lead them to the exit that way.
Right. Get the ponies. Go into the door. Go into the scary
door.
Go
over there. That's right. So Frodo's calling for the others. He hears their voices. He follows where he thinks they're coming from, and calls out, "Where are you?" Now, I'm going to go ahead and, unless there's something more in this section that you want to talk about, I'm going to read the next bit where he's actually captured. Are you ready for that?
Yep, I am.
Well, then here we go. He imagined suddenly that he caught a muffled cry, and he made towards it. And even as he went forward, the mist was rolled up and thrust aside, and the starry sky was unveiled. A glance showed him that he was now facing southwards, and was on a round hilltop, which he must have climbed from the north. Out of the east the biting wind was blowing. To his right there loomed against the westward stars a dark black shape. A great barrow stood there. "Where are you?" he cried again, both angry and afraid.
"Here,"
said a voice, deep and cold, that seemed to come out of the ground.
"I am waiting for you."
"No," said Frodo. But he did not run away. His knees gave, and he fell on the ground. Nothing happened, and there was no sound. Trembling, he looked up, in time to see a tall, dark figure, like a shadow against the stars. It leaned over him. He thought there were two eyes, very cold, though lit with a pale light that seemed to come from some remote distance. Then a grip, stronger and colder than iron, seized him. The icy touch froze his bones, and he remembered no more. Oh, boy. Oh, boy. Yeah. There's the jump cut right there when you get the "here," said a voice deep and cold. Oh, man, that's creepy. Man.
Yeah, there are few things scarier than that.
Yeah.
"I am waiting for you."
And a voice that is coming out of the ground, really, where voices ought not to be coming from.
No.
I want to talk a little bit about the geography, though, if I may. Let's take a look at the map. Let's go to the map. He realizes he's facing south. He's somehow come around and climbed this hill from the north. So we get that if you're picturing yourself on a map, he's going south. Mm-hmm. He's climbed from the north. To his left is the east, and that's where the wind is coming from. And on his right, the west, is the barrow.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you remember, Tom gave them advice, pass the barrows by on the west side.
Oh,
so Frodo here is on the wrong side of the barrow. He's Widdershins, if you will.
That's right.
That we talked about earlier.
Yeah. Mm. Well, and now you see what happens when you cross Widdershins of the barrow.
Don't be on the wrong side of the barrow.
Don't be on the wrong side of the barrow. The wights are waiting for you there. Oh.
Goodness. And then finally, the wight doesn't physically appear, but you hear his voice there, that moment when he says, "I am waiting for you." Mm-hmm. Just gives the chills for sure.
Well, and then you see this tall, dark figure rise against the stars. I mean, blocking out the stars. Shadow blocking out the stars, which, think about the symbolism of that, when the stars are always this symbols of hope, this
Right.
reminder that Varda's watching over you, and
here's a shadow blocking
that
them out.
Ooh.
Uh-huh. And the only two lights now, instead of being the stars, are these cold, kind of eye-like things lit with this pale light.
Yeah. Spooky stuff. And the pale light in the wight's eyes, it reminds me not only of the pale lamp-like eyes of Gollum in The Hobbit, but also of Grendel in Beowulf. I think we talked about this in a postscript a long time ago.
I think we did.
Back when we met Gollum. And there's this light in Grendel's eyes as he enters Hrothgar's Hall of Herod. And I'm going to read a little bit from Tolkien's translation of Beowulf here.
Okay.
He came now to the house, a man-shaped journeying of men's mirth shorn. The door at once sprang back, barred with forged iron, when claws he laid on it. He wrenched then wide, baleful with raging heart, the gaping entrance of the house. Then swift on the bright patterned floor the demon paced. In angry mood he went, and from his eyes stood forth most like to flame, unholy light. So again, that's from Tolkien's translation of Beowulf, and credit to Douglas Anderson, whose annotated Hobbit first made me aware of the connection between the pale light in Gollum's eyes with the pale light in Grendel's. I can't help thinking of that again here, and just how evil this light in the eyes strikes me as. It's just so creepy.
Yeah, it's now a full evil. It's a demonic evil. This is this isn't just some natural thing. This is a supernatural evil.
Yeah. This is scarier than the Willow now.
Oh, by far. This is otherworldly, whereas the Willow is still, a danger in this world.
Yeah. Right.
The white is beyond it. And speaking of the white, even though we're done for the reading tonight, and we'll continue, of course, in the next episode, I want us to do a sidebar on the Barrow-wight. I think it's worth kind of discussing this before we get into next week's episode.
Yeah.
So I'm going to start with a few observations that Tom Shippey made in The Road to Middle-earth about the Barrow-wight. Now, we're going to be coming back to some of this same section. So for those of you who have The Road to Middle-earth, it's in pages 105 to 110. So we'll be coming back here when we talk more about Tom at the end of the chapter. There's a lot of really wonderful bits about him there. As we mentioned before in the last chapter, Bombadil existed in written form long before The Lord of the Rings, even before The Hobbit, all the way back to that poem, The Adventures of Tom Bombadil, which was first printed in 1934. But interestingly, just as Tom is a holdover from this older poetry, so is Goldberry, so is Willowman, so are the Badger folk, who make just a very small appearance, unfortunately. And yes, folks, so is the Barrow-wight.
Yep.
After defeating all these foes in The Adventures of Tom Bombadil, Tom returns to his home and encounters the Barrow-wight. Now, Sean, I've asked him to read the relevant verse for us. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's right. So after defeating these foes, as you've said, Tom goes home, and that's where he encounters the Barrow-wight. And here's the verse. You've forgotten Barrow-wight dwelling in the old mound, up there atop the hill with the ring of stones round. He's got loose tonight, under the earth he'll take you. Poor Tom Bombadil, pale and cold he'll make you.
Oh.
So, yeah, the Barrow-wight, just like, all those other characters from that 1934 poem you mentioned, was brought into this story to flesh out the adventures that the hobbits have, all in conjunction with this Tom Bombadil episode.
Right.
Now, sadly, as you said, they've been almost entirely badger-free, which I think was a mistake. But
I agree.
You always need more badgers. But just like so much that Tolkien
needs, this book needs more badgers.
More badgers.
Anyway.
As we do the worst Christopher Walken.
That is the worst Christopher Walken. That wasn't Christopher Walken. That was some New Jersey version of Christopher Walken. It was terrible.
That was me. But,
well, okay.
But like so much else that Tolkien borrows from himself, he's worked in very specific and important details to fit it into the larger legendarium. And we'll see much of this later. The treasure that Tom takes from the Barrow, the history of, the legitimate occupant of the Barrow, and how the Wight got there in the first place.
That's right. Now, of course, we talked about how the Barrow-wight got there in the first place, the fact that he was sent there by the Witch King of Angmar himself around the time of the Great Plague. Now, if you missed that, go back and listen to episode 116, where we discussed that it wasn't the spirit of one of the slain Dunedain, but an evil spirit dwelling in the Barrow. But there's a bit more from the Hunt for the Ring that's worth discussing. I've got something here that comes to us from one of the Marquette manuscripts, courtesy of Hammond and Skull. Now, in this manuscript, parts of which do end up in the discussion from Hunt for the Ring that Christopher Tolkien puts in Unfinished Tales, we learn that Tolkien's own notes show that 4 of the riders pursue rangers along Greenway, and having slain them or driven them off eastwards, make a camp at Andrath, where the road passes between the Barrow-downs and the South Downs. The Witch King now visits the Barrow-downs and stops there some days, probably until late on 27. Now, as an aside, that would just be yesterday in the story, the previous day. So that's what Tolkien had written down.
So that's September 27th.
Yes, September 27th.
Yeah, okay.
Exactly. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to what Tolkien's saying in his notes here. He says, this proves a main error, though in fact it was nearly successful, since the Barrow-wights are roused, and all things of evil spirit, hostile to elves and men, are on the watch with malice in the Old Forest and on the Barrow-downs.
Now that's really fascinating, because not only does that explain, the specific hostility of the Barrow-wight here, but it might also explain a little bit of Old Man Willow, doesn't it?
I mean, I think
we did talk. Yeah, we talked before about how he's not allied with Sauron. I think we discussed that back in episode 113. But still, when you say all things of evil spirit, hostile to elves and men, are on the watch, that certainly seems to describe Old Man Willow.
Mm-hmm.
So I think he must have been one of the evil things that was stirred by the Witch King's presence.
I would say so, certainly.
Now, another interesting thing, going back to the Barrow-wights and their ancient connection to the Witch King, in an early draft of this chapter, which you can find now in Return of the Shadow, there's actually some text that Tolkien penciled into one of his drafts that says Tom Bombadil seemed to think that the riders and Barrow-wights had some kind of kinship or understanding.
Oh.
I should clarify, the Black Riders, obviously. I think probably obvious from the context, but So now kinship might not actually be supported by the final version of the story, but an understanding between the Ringwraiths and the Barrow-wights certainly is, if they were sent there by the Witch King, right?
That makes sense.
It is interesting that very early in the composition of the tale, Tolkien really was going with this idea of a kinship. In a set of notes that were an outline to the previous chapter in the House of Tom Bombadil, before he actually wrote that chapter, he kind of made a little outline. And one of the notes he made to himself was, Barrow-wights related to Black Riders. Are Black Riders actually horsed Barrow-wights?
Oh, my. Oh, my.
And we know they're not in the finished text. Obviously, folks,
It changed, right? That's not how it works out.
Right. In the final book, Black Riders and Barrow-wights are two very different kinds of enemies.
Yes.
And I'm glad that he changed it as the story evolved in his mind, but it's always just fascinating to see how much Tolkien modified the story as he wrote it, and how some of these little things kind of continue on in some fashion. Barrow-wights are not the same as Black Riders anymore, but they're related to them.
Certainly not in a literal
terms of kinship
way.
Related to them in the sense of, they were sent there by the Witch King. Right. That's really cool to me to see that he holds on to some seed of this idea as he goes forward.
Well, and to see how he made it up as he went along. I think so many authors today, it seems like certainly the way you put together a story is to create all the detail first, before you even start writing anything, outline everything and understand every character and figure out how the plot lines are all going to work out before you even put pen to paper. And clearly Tolkien was not going by that at all. He just started changing things up as he went along.
Yeah.
Barrow-wights related to Black Riders, or Black Riders horsed Barrow-wights.
Isn't that wild?
Yeah. Well, and certainly, like you said, there is a connection. I mean, the Witch King of Angmar, who is of course the head of the Black Riders, had sent the Barrow-wights into the Barrows.
Yeah.
Goodness. Well, good stuff. And we're of course going to spend a lot more time with Mr. Barrow-wight in the next episode.
Barrow-wight or Barry-wight?
Did my Barry-wight joke slip right by you there?
Yeah.
Maybe I can even get a song ready.
I'm waiting for you.
Hey, Frodo, I'm waiting for you.
I'm over here.
All right, over here. You look so good, Frodo.
Oh, man, that's just terrible.
It is awful. It is so awful that we should
terrible.
actually end tonight's chapter discussion on that very note. But do be sure to join us again next week when we not only get a close-up look at the Barrow-wight, but we get a close-up look at real Hobbit courage.
And thanks to you, I cannot help but see Barry-wight every time you say Barrow-wight.
I know. I always pictured the Barrow wight as being real scrawny and
Skinny,
tall and lean.
yeah.
And
right.
now I don't.
No.
It's just
Not this big,
dude.
Burly, bearded
deep
singer.
voice.
Yeah.
Sort of. Yeah.
Right over here, baby. So,
oh, goodness.
Before we reach into Barry's bag, I mean Barliman's bag, we want to remind you.
Done.
Thank you. We want to remind you about the fellowship of the podcast. Now, if you've been listening recently, you've heard us talk about how close we were to our next goal of setting up a Discord server.
Mm-hmm.
Well, folks, no surprise here. It turns out our listeners apparently want to experience our private humiliation, so we should have that set up by the time this airs.
Yes, we should. I'm working on it now, as a matter of fact. But to keep our embarrassment amongst friends, the Discord server will be limited to our patrons at the Gift of Gondor level or higher. So, would you like to listen in live during an episode recording? Hear all the things that don't even make the cutting room floor?
The things that don't even belong on our outtakes page, folks.
That is correct. Yes, yes. The things that are, not only do they fall on the cutting room floor, I then bring in a flamethrower and incinerate them.
Sweep them under the rug and pretend
and then
they
burn
never
the
happened.
rug. And then throw the remnants of the burned rug past the doors of midnight into the timeless void.
Yeah.
If you would like to listen into something like that, then be sure to visit patreon.com/prancingponypod. Fortunately, you'll also get all sorts of other goodies like access to exclusive content, PPP swag, all sorts of goodies. And check out our next goal. I didn't honestly think I'd be mentioning that for a while, but we're already almost halfway between the goal of setting up a Discord server and the next goal. That one is setting up a monthly live hangout with us on Discord, just a chance to chat with us, a couple of your, hopefully, favorite podcast hosts.
We hope. And if you're looking for a new Tolkien book, check out the official library pages at our website, theprancingponypodcast.com, where we've put together a set of links for our listeners to all the books we've ever mentioned on the show, Tolkien-related or otherwise. And if you wouldn't mind posting a review on iTunes, we'd be grateful for that. That increases our visibility. That means more new listeners, more great questions for Barliman, more discussion on social media, and a livelier Tolkien community.
Mm-hmm. And we should have our next t-shirt available for sale by the time this airs. Now, at the moment, we're still working on which designs and colors will be available this time around. But be sure to check out our Facebook page, @PrancingPonyPod, for more details. Now, speaking of social media, it's also helpful if you share us. Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, wherever there are Tolkien fans. Now, with that, it's time to see what old Barliman, not Barry, has in the mailbag for us. Sean?
All right, baby. Well, I knew we were going to end our discussion.
No. That's Elvis, not Barry. I just want to help you with that.
It's terrible.
That was bad, and I'm going to call you on it.
That was terrible.
That's all right. Good stuff.
Well, I really did know we were going to end our discussion today on this bone-chilling cliffhanger, so I asked Barliman to deliver some mail that would uplift our spirits. He came across a couple of messages from Tracey S. in Connecticut that had been in the mailbag for a while. Sorry about that, Tracey. But I think they're going to help us sleep easier tonight. See, Tracey has a talent for writing parody lyrics for songs, which are hilarious and which I truly appreciate. Yeah. I'm kind of fond of making up parody lyrics for songs myself, but I haven't brought them onto the show before because they're usually just about my cats.
Oh, okay. Well, that makes sense.
Just something I do to, it's something to amuse the kids, you know.
Good.
And my wife sometimes, and annoy them mostly. But but Tracey apparently likes to write Tolkien-themed parody lyrics. Now, she told me that some people call this a filk or filking when you write parody lyrics with a fantasy or science fiction theme. She says some people call it that. She still calls it a parody, which I can't say I blame her. I would just as soon never say the word filking ever again. But anyway,
I'll call it a parody too, yeah.
How I don't even want to know how somebody came up with that word. But anyway, Tracey sent us some lyrics as a gift, and this is the gift that keeps on giving, folks, because
of course it is. Oh, no.
Alan, she's asked you to sing one of them.
No. I can't say no to a listener as much as I might want to.
No, you cannot. You cannot.
No. She imagines this first song as sort of a singing telegram from Frodo to the Eagles, which he sends to them from Rivendell after remembering Bilbo's tales of the Eagles. Now, well, and as you'll hopefully recognize, it is sung to the tune of Fly Me to the Moon, written by Bart Howard, but probably best known as sung by Frank Sinatra. Now, once again, lyrics are by Tracey S., so all credit and any blame to her.
I really can't wait for this.
Fly me to Mount Doom, save me a long and weary trek. Let me just eject the ring from a perch upon your neck. In other words, pick me up. In other words, Gwaihir, fly me. And then there's a second verse, which I will dare to sing here. Hold on, let me see if I can get this right.
You got this.
There are orcs along my path, and golems lurking round somewhere. We could do this in a day or two if you'll just take me by air. In other words, please come through. In other words, let's go fly. I'm mortified.
Oh, man. You know what? We should not have made the Barry White jokes because I'm pretty sure it's the ghost of Frank Sinatra that's with us here tonight.
I think you're right.
Very well done, my friend.
Well, thank you, sir.
Really, really well done. I set you a challenge, and
you did.
You rose to it, and I salute you for it.
Well, and let it be known publicly that I am able to edit some things, but I don't have auto-tune in my editing box. So,
wouldn't that be funny if you could do really serious, heavy auto-tune?
Oh, yeah. Like some of the pop music. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I won't be doing that. But I mean, any pitch problems are just going to remain. Let's be clear.
Yeah, that's just pure Sisto, 100% Sisto.
100%. Oh, man.
Well, look, folks, I wouldn't ask my co-host to do anything I wouldn't do myself. Tracey sent us another parody song later on. She sent this one to us in late October. Now, at that time, we had just covered Bilbo's farewell party, and we had just talked about the famous Hobbit dance, the Springle Ring. And as you'll notice, Christmas was kind of on Tracey's mind when she wrote this one. I don't think I have to explain the tune for this one, no matter how badly I butcher it. The party tree is lit, the wine is mighty strong. Bilbo's giving us a speech, let's hope it's not too long. You know how he can get, he's liable to recite, or spin a story of his past, let's hope he won't tonight. Oh, Springle ring, Springle ring, awesome. Springle ring with me. Bilbo's paused amidst applause, so let's assume we're free to Springle ring, awesome. Springle ring, Springle ring with me. A cracker band with bells in hand will dance a round or three.
Oh, that's great.
And I'm going to go, I'll do one more verse, and then I'll stop. It goes on, folks.
It does, doesn't it?
The fireworks were grand. We've not had such in years. That dragon took my breath, but there was no time for tears. For supper then began, and the food it never failed. I'll ask Rosie for a dance, no, I'll just have another ale. Oh, Springle ring, Springle ring.
That's great stuff.
I'll stop there.
Brilliant.
It goes on for a couple more verses, and hopefully we'll be able to share that. But
we'll have to.
Really, really wonderful stuff.
So clever.
Tracey S. in Connecticut. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tracey.
These are brilliant and truly well done.
They really are. Even if they were well written, but not sung,
but poorly
with
sung,
as much gusto as they were written. So, folks, if you like these songs, despite how he sang them, go check out Tracey's blog at agoldoffish.wordpress.com. Now, she's got a lot more fun stuff there, including a parody, or that other word I won't say, of the entire story of The Hobbit, set to the tune of an incredibly difficult song to sing that we will never try, Billy Joel's "We Didn't Start the Fire." Which is probably sets a record for the most syllables in any modern song. We will include a link to that in our show notes. Now, Sean, we've thoroughly embarrassed ourselves, but do we have anything in the bag? Anything to
put this episode
dignity
behind us? Yes, and make people forget our singing.
Anything.
Shane O. wrote to us just a few days ago, in fact, with a very timely question about the last chapter.
Huh.
Shane said, I wonder if you've ever considered what Frodo intended to do once he put on the ring at Tom Bombadil's house.
Ooh.
In his Exploring Lord of the Rings podcast, episode 35, Corey Olsen suggests that Frodo might have actually meant to leave the house and go away somewhere. After all, text says, he got up and crept quietly away from the fireside towards the outer door. Shane says, I must admit, in all my readings, I've only ever thought of Frodo vanishing at that moment as a means for him to prove that the ring returned to him by Tom really was the genuine article. As for him departing alone, I never considered that. Wow. And I gotta say, Shane, I never considered that either. It is a really interesting observation, though, by the great Tolkien professor. Alan, any thoughts on this?
Well, first, the fact that Corey Olsen got to this spot in episode 35, I actually figured it wouldn't be till like episode 72 before he got to this part of the story.
Tom Bombadil's house.
35 is not that slow compared to us. I think we probably, this is somewhere in that range. I mean, granted, we have, episodes that aren't related to the story, the interview episodes.
Yeah.
Like when we had Serena on or
we're something like 20, Nightfall. This is like 28 episodes in,
29
right?
something, or 30. 29, I think.
Yeah. We started at 91 like of this season. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. So this would be, So, anyway, I figured it would be a little further down the line. But what am I really thinking in terms of this moment? I have to say I seriously doubt he was thinking about heading to Rivendell on his own. But, I think he wanted to step out for a bit of fresh air at a very minimum. But I think the ring itself wanted to get away from Tom. We talked last time, or last chapter, I don't know if it was last episode, about how the ring couldn't influence Tom at all. Tom has zero desire for power, wealth, or anything else the ring can provide. I mean, he already apparently has immortality, so he certainly doesn't need a longer life. And he clearly wasn't affected by it. Now, we see in this passage shortly after that the ring couldn't even deceive him into not seeing Frodo.
Right.
So if the ring has any sentience here at all, it's going to want to run far, far away from this strange man with the yellow boots.
Yeah, I think so. I definitely. And I would say, though, the wording of that sentence, something prompted him to make sure.
Oh, yeah.
Speaking of Frodo, it doesn't say Frodo wanted to make sure. It says something prompted him. And as we discussed in episode 116, the ring was at work in Frodo's possessive attitude. Remember all that, stuff about his own ring and things like that.
Yeah.
Now, I do think that proving it was still his, the genuine article, as Shane says, I do think that was part of Frodo's motivation. But I definitely believe that as soon as Frodo had the ring back in his hand, it started reasserting its hold over him. First, to put the ring on, just to make sure it's mine, a very likely story. Right. But then, once it's on, I think you're right. I think the ring wants to try to get out of Tom Bombadil's realm. It wants to get back to Sauron. And to do that, it needs to get, as you said, as far away from Tom as possible. Yeah. So, I'm very on board with the idea that the ring might have put this idea in Frodo's head of slipping out the door unseen. Little knowing, of course, that Tom would be able to see, right through the illusion.
Right. It didn't realize that at the time. It almost seems like the ring had just sort of taken a back seat, and maybe its sentience was taking a nap or something, because remember, Frodo was willing to just hand it over to him. He said, let me see the ring. And he goes, oh, here you go. And the ring's like, what do you mean, here we go? What do you mean? You're not supposed to let me go. And so when it gets back, it's like, I'm digging my claws into you now.
Right. It's like being handed off to Tom sort of reawakened, kind of snapped the ring back. Yeah.
That possessive nature. Absolutely.
Yeah. A fascinating catch. And definitely.
Great question.
Anything that Corey Olsen comes up with is, he's
always worth discussing.
Always worth discussing. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a really cool catch.
I agree.
I wish we had caught it.
Well, the good news is sometime in this fall, I want to say maybe September or October, we are likely to intersect with his study of the Lord of the Rings. Somewhere we're thinking in the Council of Elrond. So after that, we will be going first. So it's possible that we might catch something that he might even say, wow, the guys over at the Prancing Pony podcast, they caught that. What a great catch. I doubt that, but it's worth thinking about.
It would be cool. We can dream.
We can. Well, folks, that wraps it up for another episode of the Prancing Pony podcast. We do ask, though, that you'll be sure to join us next week when Frodo sings 911 in rhyme.
Or 999, since he's coming from England,
true.
right?
In the UK. I'd forgotten about that entirely. You're right, but here it's 911. Yeah.
Yeah, our American-centric world.
Emergency services, the
Yes.
3-digit number for emergency services.
Whatever the 3-digit number is for emergency services is
right
in your locality.
By the way, if it's in your locality, if it's 666, move. I'm just saying. Anyway.
That might summon the Barrow-wights.
That might.
Well, folks, thanks again for listening, and thank you for making our common room on Facebook such a fun place to spend time. We want all of you to be a part of this conversation, and it does not stop when the episode ends. See the comments, questions, corrections, and more on Facebook at The Prancing Pony Podcast, on Twitter at Prancing Pony Pod, and on Instagram at Prancing Pony Pod.
And as always, a very special thank you to our patrons at the Kierdance contribution tier. They are DeMay in Alaska, James in Virginia, Tamsin in Minnesota, Emily in Texas, and Chad in Texas. We just want to really express our thanks to each of you.
Absolutely. And make sure you don't miss any episodes of the Prancing Pony Podcast. Subscribe to the show through iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app.
And one last thing, as always, don't forget to send your thoughts, comments, and most of all, your stories of waking suddenly and uncomfortably from a sleep you never meant to take. That could get really weird.
I've got some good ones.
Yeah. All from my college years, probably.
Oh, yes, definitely.
Send them to Barlaman at theprancingponypodcast.com, and we'll try to get them into our next show if they meet our family-appropriate standards. Folks, however long we've had tonight, it is still far too short a time to spend amongst such excellent and admirable listeners. But until next time.
Farewell, friends.